How many of you are willing to stand with the Honourable Member of Parliament, George Galloway, the way that he stood with us?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, distinguished elders, scholars, brothers and sisters, comrades and friends, wa assalamu alaikum, peace be on all of you. I'm overwhelmed by the size and the warmth of this reception on the last of my current speeches in the United States of America. I was here for 19 days last month. I have been here for 10 days this month, and next month I intend to spend much of that month here in the United States for reasons which I shall explain. But this is a very auspicious moment. Almost 50 years ago, in this very city, the great hero Che Guevara said in New York that the real man, the real human, must be capable of trembling with indignation at injustice meted out to anyone, anywhere. And we tremble with indignation on this occasion, sandwiched between the anniversary of the Nakba, the catastrophe which wiped Palestine from the map, swept hundreds of thousands of Palestinians into 61 years of exile, scattered to the four corners of the earth as refugees, as people without papers, without passports, without status, hunted from pillar to post, regularly massacred and imprisoned and discriminated against. And the smaller catastrophe in 1967, which took the rest of Palestine, the remaining parts of the land, and Holy Jerusalem itself. This is a time when we remember the martyrs who have given their life's blood for the right to return to their country, for the right to return their country to the map and to the councils of the world. We remember them all: Abu Ammar, Abu Jihad, Abu Ali Mustafa, Sheikh Ahmed Yassin, Dr. Rantisi, and all the thousands, tens of thousands of others whose life's blood has watered the land, the flag, and the cause of Palestine. This is the time when we remember the thousands of Palestinian prisoners still living in the dark, in the dungeons of the Israeli apartheid state. And we demand on this occasion the release of them all. The hero prisoner Marwan Barghouti, who we demand should be released and be returned to the leadership of the Palestinian people to unite the different trends within the Palestinian arena and to play his part in bringing his people to freedom. We demand the release of all the prisoners, and we demand the return of all the Palestinians to their land and to their homes, as is their legal and moral right. As will be obvious by now, from the introduction, from the video that you have seen, I have been fighting for this cause almost all of my life. I started one midsummer day in 1975 in the Scottish city of Dundee, where I was alone in the Labour Party office, running off leaflets on an old-fashioned Gestetner machine. Someone rang the doorbell. I almost didn't answer. I was there alone. I had no authority to deal with anyone. I was 21 years old. But I answered the door. Something made me answer the door. I call it Kismet, destiny. There was a young, handsome Palestinian student. He looked like Omar Sharif to me. But then all Arabs looked like Omar Sharif to me in those days. He said he was from the General Union of Palestinian Students. He wanted to talk to the leaders of the party about Palestine. I told him, there are no leaders here, but you can talk to me and I will talk to them. And after 2 hours in which he mesmerizingly described the catastrophe which had enveloped his people, I was a signed-up member of the Palestinian resistance, which I remain to this day. And I promise you, with my last breath, the last word which will be on my lips as I take my last breath, whenever it is, will be Palestine. You have to be a fisher of men. Find others like me, using the right language. You have to recruit people who might go on to be like me and give of their strength and whatever abilities that God gave them to try to advance this cause of Palestine. We have to all be missionaries for Palestine, and we have to think up projects which maximize our ability to reach and move people, which is what I have tried to do all of my life, and I have a good one for you later in this speech. Within 2 years, I was with my friend here, Ron Mackay, in 1977 in the Palestinian camps, then unknown, now notorious throughout the world, of Sabra and Shatila. I lived there. I lived in the camp of Burj al-Barajni. I lived in the Fakani district of Beirut. President Arafat took me under his wing. I was 23 years old. I used to be with him at breakfast every morning. He fed me eggs and bread and tea, and I was with him all the best years of my life and until the last day of his at the Perse Military Hospital in Paris when he passed away. I mention that not just because I feel always that he's watching over me, but because I want to tell the FBI man in the room, FBI man in the room, I'm not a supporter myself of Hamas. I have never been a supporter of Hamas. But I am a supporter of democracy. And the only people entitled to choose the leadership of the Palestinian people are the Palestinian people themselves. I never accepted it in the past when London and Washington, still less Tel Aviv, refused to recognize Arafat as the leader of the Palestinian people. And I'm not going to accept it now when the leadership has been chosen in the only free and democratic election ever held in any Arab country at any time in history. And I have, as was said, done many things. In Dundee, in my small Scottish city, where we twinned Dundee with Nablus, 29 years ago, and became the first public building in the Western world to fly the Palestinian flag. And you know what? It's still flying today on the City Hall 29 years later. I mention that because audacity, the audacity of hope, remember that? Audacity has to be our watchword. In the words of the great leader of the French Revolution, Danton, l'audace, encore l'audace, toujours l'audace. Audacity, again audacity, always audacity. That's the spirit with which we must approach this question. People told me I was crazy in 1980 to dream that we could officially twin our city with a town in Palestine, that we could bring a man with no legs, Bassam Shaka, the mayor of Nablus, whose legs were blown off in an Israeli terrorist attack, that we could fly this flag. It became one of the hottest controversies in which I have ever participated. They brought the entire leadership of the Jewish community to our city, wearing striped clothes from the death camps of Nazi Germany, to try to force us to take down this flag. But we refused. People said that you will never achieve it, but we did. And what I'm going to ask you to do tonight is audacious, yes. It's controversial, yes. But we cannot be afraid of controversy. When I appeared in front of the US Senate, in front of ex-Senator Norman Coleman of Minnesota in 2005, he tried to bully me at the beginning with some procedural nonsense. I told him, Senator, don't make the mistake of imagining that I'm afraid of you. I'm afraid of only God. I'm afraid of only God. I read in the newspapers. Last night I read in Cleveland a newspaper article that I was controversial. Even Lamis called me notorious. They said I was inflammatory. Well, I don't know what's controversial about what I'm saying. Everything I've been involved in turned out to be right. It's the people who were wrong who should be described as controversial. And what are we trying to sell? We're trying to sell the truth. That's all. It's not difficult. If the American people only knew what we know, they would flock to our banner in their millions. And it's our job to tell them. I had the misfortune of drinking one of the soft drinks here, Dr. Pepper. It's advertised as, well, try it. What's the worst that could happen? We're not trying to sell Dr. Pepper here. We're the Coca-Cola in this argument. We're the real thing in this argument. We're the ones who are telling the truth. But in honor of those who think I am, let me start out by talking about what I'm not going to be talking about. Nothing I'm going to say this evening is against the United States of America. Believe it or not, I'm the only woman in the entire 19th century who emigrated from America to Scotland. It's true. It's true. The census shows she sailed from New York City to Dundee. And if you've ever seen Dundee, you'll understand what a peculiar decision that was. I think she got on the wrong boat. But that's what happened. So I'm a native New Yorker and very proud to be so. In any case, what's not to love about this country? From sea to shining sea, with all its achievements, having brought together people from all the corners of the earth, the poor, the wretched, the huddled masses who yearn to be free. What's not to love about such a country? We're glad that by and large, nus, we share a common language. As Oscar Wilde said, we're two people divided by a common language. By the way, there's a U in honourable and in coloured. One day we'll teach you how to use the language properly, the language of Shakespeare properly. We want a special relationship with the people of the United States. We just don't want the kind of special relationship Miss Lewinsky had with President Clinton. We want something rather more honorable, rather more equal and dignified than that. Just because I hated George W. Bush doesn't mean I hate the United States of America. Millions of Americans hated George W. Bush. Neither, still less, am I going to be speaking against Jews. This has nothing to do with religion. There are thousands of Jews, some of them here, who support justice for Palestine. We reject the synonym that Zionism equals Judaism. Jews lived in Palestine as neighbors with Christians and Muslims for centuries before Zionism poisoned the well and fueled this great catastrophe. Albert Einstein, the greatest Jew, the greatest mind of human history, was asked to be the first president of Israel. And he replied, I could never be the president of a country whose future is built on the destroyed dreams and the bones of the people of the land from which it was taken. We honor such Jewish people. And we reject the idea that the people of Einstein and Marx and Epstein should be represented by Sharon, by Netanyahu, and by Lieberman. And neither am I going to be, even though my name is George, seeking to recolonize the United States of America. I'm mindful, more than you can imagine, of the fact that my own country was the architect, was the author of this great tragedy. In the building in which I have sat for 23 years, I have to pass every day the room in which a British statesman, Mr. Balfour, in 1917, promised on behalf of one people to a second people, who, by the way, were every one of them, every one of these Zionist leaders was an atheist. They laid no biblical claim to the land then. They were ready then to make their European settler state, their colonial state, in any place in the world they could get their hands on. They negotiated for their state to be in Uganda, in Patagonia, in the Seychelles. None of them claimed that God was an estate agent and had promised them the land of Palestine then. That came later. Mr. Balfour promising a second people who didn't represent the majority, in fact represented a tiny minority of Jews in the world at that time. Land which belonged to a third people, even by the standards of imperialism. This was a brazen act. Britain gave away a land which it did not yet even possess to another people. At that time, 1/5 of the world's area, 1/4 of the world's population was governed from that little building in my little country. 1/4 of all the world. Britain had an empire, it was said, so vast that upon it the sun never set. Though, as my Irish grandfather used to say, that's because God would never trust the British in the dark. This act by Balfour, who, by the way, didn't do this out of love for the Jews. Balfour actually hated Jews. He was an anti-Semite. He wanted the Jews to leave England so he would never have to look on their faces again. You don't have to love Jews to be a Zionist. Most Zionists are not Jews. In the United States of America, the vast majority of Zionists are not Jews. They're crazed, fundamentalist Christians. Although real Christians believe in the prophets, peace be upon them, most of those believe in the prophets and how to get a piece of them. That's a major difference. Anybody who thinks George W. Bush loved Jews has never visited his golf club down in Texas. Balfour gave this promise because he wanted what he called a loyal little Ulster, like the north of Ireland. He wanted to implant a colonial enterprise to keep the Arabs divided and weak, the better, so that imperialism could steal their things. That's why they did it. It wasn't about religion, and we must never make it about religion. We say we demand the land back. We demand the land back, and we demand the right of the people to return to the land. And as Rami said in his wonderful poem earlier, we're not threatening to push anyone into the sea. Jews, Muslims, and Christians can live on the land, but only as equal citizens before the law and not as superior citizens. You know, anytime now, Mr. Lieberman will be arriving here. Hillary Clinton will have to kiss him. Who is this Lieberman? Avigdor Lieberman, the foreign minister of Israel, intends to make every non-Jewish citizen of Israel, passport holders, to sign an oath accepting that Israel is a Jewish state. Can you imagine black Americans being asked to sign an oath that America is a white state? It's a preposterous idea, to borrow a word from that video. It's an obscene idea. Even the grand wizards of the Ku Klux Klan wouldn't dare to advance such a proposition. And yet that's the basis on which Lieberman was elected and is now the foreign minister of Israel. And when he comes here, a red carpet will be rolled out for this racist murderer, whilst the elected leadership of the Palestinian people are called terrorists, and people are given a license to hunt them down and, if possible, to kill them. This is the monstrosity of this picture. This is the insult which is added to the injury of having lost their land, been scattered around the world. The Palestinians, as the victims of terrorism, are called the terrorists, and Israel, which is the terrorist, are called the victims of terrorism. This is a perversion of the English language itself. George Orwell in his epic novel 1984 described when he wrote it, he was imagining a future when the English language itself would be perverted. When peace would be called war, war would be called peace, lies would be called truth. We've reached this situation now when victims of terrorism are branded as terrorists, and those who support the victims have the FBI in their meetings looking to see if we step out of line. Well, I promise you that what I'm going to propose this evening does not break any US laws. We will not be breaking any laws of this country. I just say it's a pity that those fundraising for Israel are not subjected to the same forensic examination as those of us involved in Palestine. Now, the latest of my long lifetime of involvement with the Palestinians began when I watched, as you watched, the 27th December massacres unleashed by the State of Israel on the defenseless people of Palestine in the Gaza Strip. This was almost unique in the annals of modern warfare. Normally, when a people are bombed, the civilians can run away, can hide, can become refugees. In this case, in Gaza, 25 miles long, 3¼ miles wide, the largest concentration camp on the earth. The people who did the bombing took the precaution of locking all the doors so the people had nowhere to run and nowhere to hide. A people who had no air force, no anti-aircraft guns, no navy, no tanks, no heavy weapons, were shot like sitting ducks, were shot like fish in a barrel, were subjected to a merciless bombardment for 22, 23 days. 1,400 Palestinians were killed. 1,400 Palestinians were killed, the vast majority of them women and children. Thousands were maimed and orphaned. Hundreds had to have a limb amputated. Scores had to have 2 limbs amputated. And dozens, believe it or not, had to have 3 limbs amputated. And they don't even have wheelchairs in Gaza to be pushed around. This massacre that we saw, as long as we didn't have to depend on Fox News or Sky News or the Bush and Blair Corporation of what used to be the BBC, we were able, if we had access to Al Jazeera, to Press TV, for which I present 2 programs every week, if we had access to the internet, to YouTube, we saw the crimes that were committed, and we listened for a word from the world to try to bring it to a halt, and we listened in vain. But instead of sitting at home crying, though crying was necessary, instead of our hearts merely bleeding, millions of us around the world took to the streets and marched in protest at this great crime, here in New York, in London, and around the world, In London, on the 10th of January, 100,000 people in the land of Balfour marched on the Israeli embassy in Kensington. Day after day, night after night, we besieged that embassy, as many others did around the world. And we saw those crimes in bloody technicolor on our screens. Let me tell you about white phosphorus. We saw the white phosphorus gas being dropped on a civilian population that had been locked up. Imagine something calling itself, though we don't accept it, the Jewish state, dropping gas on civilians, dropping gas on the United Nations in Gaza. We saw the pictures, don't deny it. We saw the pictures of the gas falling on United Nations schools and warehouses, clinics. We saw the United Nations drivers murdered on their way to deliver food and medicine to the victims of this aggression. The United Nations had an inquiry into this series of crimes. They concluded that Israel was guilty of war crimes. And the president of Israel himself, Shimon Peres, the president of the state, announced to the United Nations, and I quote, that Israel does not accept one single word of this report. I'm asking, here in New York, how come Israel is allowed to continue to be a member of the United Nations when it defies every decision that the United Nations makes? I know about white phosphorus. I happened to be in Beirut with Arafat when Israel began its invasion of Lebanon in 1982. I was in Beirut when Israel was reducing an Arab capital to rubble and ash, to silence, the same silence from the governments of the world, except from Gaddafi. Gaddafi ordered Arafat to commit suicide for allowing Israel to enter West Beirut. Arafat answered, if the Arab armies would come to our rescue, nobody would have to commit suicide here in West Beirut. I went to the hospitals. I saw the children, victims of white phosphorus, the first time Israel used it. I saw the white smoke coming from their noses and their mouths as they cooked to death inside. That's what happens when you breathe this white phosphorus. You can't breathe it out until you're dead, until you have baked to death from the inside. We saw that little girl, if we had Al Jazeera, 3 years old, like the little child I had on my knee just a few minutes ago, held up to the camera, her face blackened by flames, having laid out dead for 3 days in Zaytuna on the edge of Gaza City. The cameraman held her up, dead, minus her arm and her leg, which had been eaten by the dogs that were roaming the rubble of Gaza in the killing fields of those days. We read the report in the English Guardian of the baby that was found dead, still suckling on the toe of her dead mother. Keep that image in your mind. A dead baby suckling on the toe of her dead mother. The next time you hear some Brooklyn accented barbarian as a spokesman for Israel on television telling you that they're the only democracy in the Middle East, what kind of democracy is it that murders children and gasses civilians, having locked them up for the duration? And we saw the little girl, aged 10, keep that in your mind. Standing in the rubble of her house, one of the 61,200 Palestinian houses that were destroyed in 22 days. I don't know how many houses there are in Brooklyn, but just imagine going out tonight and finding 61,200 houses had been destroyed by aerial bombardment. This little girl had been staying with her grandmother, and when she heard that her house had been bombed, they went there to discover that her mother and her father and all 5 of her brothers had all been killed by these bombs. I interviewed this little girl just a few weeks ago, standing in the rubble, and she said something to me which broke my heart, and I have to say it to you. She asked me this: where is this Arab world that they teach us about in school? Where is this ummah that they teach us about in the mosque? Why did they leave us alone? She said, tears running down her face. Why did they leave us alone to face this? What did we do to deserve this? She repeated it, but a second time to the back of my head, because I could not look upon her face, for I had no answer to the questions that she was asking. But I'll tell you something. I promised her that I would be her father, I would be her brother, and I would find thousands of people who would be her brothers and the brothers of all who had been left alone. On the 10th of January, as I marched with the 100,000 in London to the embassy, the snow was falling, darkness too, and I was thinking about what I was going to say at the rally at the end of the demonstration. And I decided that the time had come to declare that action speaks louder than words, that tears, however heartfelt, were easy to shed, and that we had to do something rather than merely speak or listen. And so I announced that 4 weeks later, I would lead a massive British convoy all the way from London to Gaza to break the siege and to bring aid to the suffering Palestinian people there. Within 4 weeks, we had gathered 110 trucks, ambulances, fire engines, vehicles laden with aid collected from the poorest people in the poorest parts of the United Kingdom. 300 British citizens flying British flags on the front of their vehicles. Most of them had never been out of their own towns before. Most of them had never been in any Arab country before. They were looking around in London in awe at the big buildings that they had never seen before. But they were ready, and they did, to drive 8,000 kilometers through 8 countries, through 2 continents, all the way to Gaza. It was a very, very difficult journey. We drove through Belgium, France, Spain. We took the ferry to Morocco and entered the Arab world. Most of the governments of these countries, I must tell you, they were not really pleased to see us. A convoy more than 1 mile long on its way to Gaza, raising the inevitable question amongst the people of those countries, of their governments: what are you doing? Where's your convoy? When are you going to break the siege of Gaza? They tried everything to keep us away from the people. We were forbidden to enter the towns and cities of the Arab Maghreb for traffic management reasons, you understand. They found roads that no one had driven on for years to try to keep us away from the people. But no matter how many soldiers and police they deployed, the Arab people of the Maghreb found their way to this convoy. They pushed their way through the police to touch the convoy, to hold up their babies to be kissed by the people of the convoy, to push food, anything, through the windows of the convoy. We arrived in Gaza with 50 wedding rings given to us by women in the Maghreb who took them off and forced them through the windows and told us to take them to Gaza. Some of the borders were closed, locked shut. The border between Morocco and Algeria, they had to use fire to open the barrier because it had rusted shut. In fact, it had only opened twice in 16 years. Imagine. Both times for me, in fact, for my convoy to Baghdad in 1999 and the convoy to Gaza in 2009. Wallahi, they should make me the envoy between Morocco and Algeria. I could solve this problem overnight if I only knew what the problem was. Imagine Sykes and Picot, who in the same building as Balfour and me, divided the Arab world into these 23 artificial, often ridiculous states with their puppet presidents and their corrupt kings. They couldn't have imagined. They couldn't have imagined that so divided would the Arabs be that they would actually lock their borders shut between their states. But we were received by the people everywhere with acclamation. One old man, a fellahin in Algeria, he begged me to take him with me in the back of my vehicle. I told him, I sleep in the back of this vehicle. There's no room in this vehicle. Anyway, they're not short of fellahin in Gaza. What do you want to do? He said, I want to tell them that when they bleed, we bleed. When they cry, we cry. And we're dreaming of them day and night as they go through this catastrophe. The only country, and I'm not a supporter of Gaddafi or his system, the only country where the government and the people received us with genuine warmth and support was Libya. The son of Gaddafi, no, it's true, I have to say it. In honesty, I have to say it. The son of Gaddafi asked me, how many vehicles do you have? I said 110. He said, you now have 220. We will double the size of this convoy and come with you, behind you, to Gaza. And then we reached Egypt, the great Egypt. No, the great Egypt. The Egypt of Abdel Nasser, the beating heart of the Arab world. We reached Egypt. People asked me, why did you take such a long way? Why didn't you go through Europe and sail to Alexandria? I told them because I wanted to give the Egyptian government plenty of time to think about us. And it was a good call, because by the time we crossed into Egypt, such momentum, such popularity in the Arab world now attended this convoy of Britishers who'd driven all this way, that we discovered we had been adopted as the guests of the ruling party in Egypt. And they're a very popular party, by the way. They get 99.9% of the vote every time there's an election. So I knew that we were in the company of very popular people. Everywhere I went in Egypt, behind me there was a huge portrait of His Excellency President Hosni Mubarak. I take this opportunity to extend my condolences to Hosni Mubarak and his family on the tragic loss of their grandson in recent days. I'm not saying because we were the guests of the ruling party that we had no problems in Egypt. We had many problems in Egypt, but I don't dwell on them because we have to go back to Egypt again and again and again and again and again and again until we have broken this siege. That's why I'm here tonight, because I'm here to tell you that when we arrived in Gaza on the birthday of the Prophet, peace be upon him, and kissed the holy ground of Palestine, we discovered that though the devastation was everything and more that you can imagine, though 1,400 families are grieving the loss of their family members, the dead are in a better place now. Those who survived are the ones who are suffering. And they are suffering not because of Israel, but because of an Arab siege on Gaza, and that is what we have to break. We have to end this situation once and for all. No, it's true. 1,400 Palestinians were killed in 22 days. Alhamdulillah, more Palestinians were born in that 22 days than were killed by Israel. Israel cannot kill its way out of this problem. The Palestinians can face Israeli aggression. What they can't face is what that little girl asked. Where is this Arab world? Where is this Ummah? Why did they leave us alone? It's the siege that's destroying the people in Gaza. Just the other day, there was a huge fire in Al-Arish at the Susan Mubarak Stadium. What was burning was a mountain of food sent by Qatar to feed the Palestinians in Gaza, which had rotted in the stadium in Egypt because it was not allowed to cross the border. What kind of people are they? What kind of people allowed food to rot whilst Palestinian women in Gaza are clambering over the garbage heaps looking for food to eat? What kind of people allow their food that they sent to be burned without saying a word about it? Where is the Arab League? Where are the 300 million Arabs in the Arab countries? Where are the presidents and the kings? Where are the billionaires and the trillionaires? How can Arabs and Muslims be allowed to starve in a siege imposed only because they had a free election and they elected somebody that London and Washington doesn't like? So we have to break that siege. If the Arabs can't break it from the Arab world, we have to break it from the outside. And we can do it. The president of Egypt doesn't want these convoys coming across his country. But as you saw in the last 24 hours, another huge convoy has been admitted into Gaza, and full marks to those who got it there. Because the people in the convoy went on hunger strike and were ready to starve themselves to death unless their convoy was allowed in. This is the audacity I'm talking about. We have to make it such that no government would dare to stop those who want to come to the rescue of that little girl and all the other little girls and boys and mothers and fathers who are suffering in Gaza. That's why on the 4th of July, on the 4th of July, Independence Day, the birthday of your country, I will lead a convoy from JFK Airport in New York, headed for Cairo, headed for Rafah, and to break the siege. We had 110 vehicles. You're 5 times bigger than us. That means you have to have 500 vehicles. We raised $2 million worth of aid. You're 5 times bigger than us and much richer than us. That means you have to raise $10 million in aid. You don't have to drive all the way. You can't. You don't have to sleep in your cars like us. All you have to do is raise the money, get to New York, and fly to Cairo, where we will already have purchased the vehicles and the aid. We need to load the aid onto the vehicles, put American flags on the front, and drive to Gaza, and no one will stand in our way. No one will stand in our way. President Mubarak will stop 1,000 American citizens, 500 American vehicles coming to bring life to Palestine, rather than the death to Palestine, which normally comes in the colors of your country. He might have more of a problem with the one I'm leading in September, the Hugo Chavez Viva Palestina Venezuela campaign. The Hugo Chavez Viva Palestina convoy will leave from Caracas for Gaza, and no one will stand in its way, especially if Hugo Chavez is at the front of the convoy. Later, I'm taking a convoy from Moscow. Then we want a convoy from China. We need convoys arriving at Rafah every day, every month, until this gate is blown away once and for all. Now, this is entirely legal. Nobody's asking you to do anything illegal. To that end, we have secured the fiscal sponsorship of one of the most respected and respectable and historic Christian organizations in this land. Pastors for Peace, who have never been involved in Palestine before. So when you write your checks to IFCO-Viva Palestina, you're not writing the checks to me. You're not writing them to Hamas or Fatah or any other political organization. You're writing those checks, you're making those donations to a Christian organization of unimpeachable credentials. When the convoy arrives in Gaza, it will give the vehicles and the aid, not to any politicians, not to any political parties. It will give the aid to a reception committee of non-government organizations, of orphanages and schools and hospitals and the Red Crescent and other organizations to whom it is entirely legal to deliver aid. But I'm asking you this. Don't embarrass me. Don't have this little girl in Gaza asking, where are the Americans? Don't have her asking, where is New York? On this last 10 days, I have already gathered enough support for 100 vehicles, and we have 7 weeks to go to get the other 400 vehicles. And New York hasn't started yet. We want to see the name of this great city on board many trucks, ambulances, and vehicles heading into the Gaza Strip. In the town of Irvine, which I had never heard of before, in the state of California. I doubt if anybody in Gaza has ever heard of Irvine. But come the 4th of July, there's going to be maybe 50 trucks from the town of Irvine alone. That's the kind of example that we want people to follow in all the cities and all the states of the United States of America. In one night, they raised $120,000 to pay for trucks to go into Gaza. So I'm asking you to rise to this challenge, to do something other than cry, to do something other than speak and other than listen. And I believe it will change everything. It only takes a few drops of rain upon the desert to transform the landscape. Believe me, the sight of 500 American flagged vehicles going into Gaza will send a message to the Muslim world that the people of America are not your enemies. And that's important as a message to send. It will send a message to the Palestinians that America can bring life as well as death. And it will send a message to the people of the United States itself that something is on the move here, that we can change, that we must change America's role in the world and its role in particular in the Middle East. President Obama was elected with high hopes. He's the most popular man on the planet. He's also one of the most educated and most intelligent. The last guy, Bush, had the excuse that he was an imbecile, an idiot. Obama has no such excuse. He has sat with Edward Said. He knows the truth. He knows this is not Dr. Pepper. He knows that what we're saying is right. And he must know that if America doesn't change its role in the Middle East, then none of America's problems in the world will go away. In fact, they'll all get worse. All we're asking from the government of America is that America follows a policy in the interests of the American people rather than a policy in the interests of other people. That's all we're asking from the government of the United States. So I've spoken long and hard tonight and on all previous nights. I hope that I've touched your hearts. I hope that I've touched your wallets. I hope that some of you will come with us to Gaza. I want to see New York there as one of the greatest cities in the world, maybe the greatest city in the world, right at the front of Viva Palestina, USA. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Here's a question from Raghib. What do you think about the Middle East forming a union like the European Union? Currency. It will stop Israel's economy if we stop using the Israeli shekel. Well, you know, the Arab world could and should be a superpower in the world. 23 countries, 300 million people, one language, one God, a common culture, from the Atlantic to the Gulf, from Marrakesh to Bahrain, the Arabs are one people. But for imperialism, they would be one union of Arab peoples. The Arab world should be an economic and a cultural and a political superpower in the world. And look at what it is instead. Incapable of lifting a finger, incapable of raising their voice, incapable of even meeting to discuss whether to raise their voice. In my opinion, unity in the Arab world is the only way that the Arabs can recover their dignity and their honor and play the role in the world which their importance would warrant. 300 million people, all this water, all this gas, all this oil, all this money, all this people, all this education, all this land. The Arabs should really be something in the world, but they are not. And the reason they are not is because the imperial powers, through Balfour and Sykes and Picot, was determined to make them weak so that the imperial powers could steal their things. But that's a project for tomorrow. The project for today is to get bread on the plates of the people in Gaza. The project for today is to end the siege on the people of Gaza. The project for today is to try to bring unity to the small section of the Arabs who are the Palestinians. And the unity talks in Cairo must succeed. This division amongst the Palestinians is disastrous and has been introduced by precisely the same people as kept the Arabs divided and weak for the best part of 100 years. Someone asks, as a student, what do you believe is the most important thing we can do? Well, in the next 7 weeks, it's to build this convoy. Beyond that, it's to be like the man who reached me and who recruited me, to go out and multiply. By the way, it would be good if you would also multiply. We need more Palestinians in the world. So go forth and multiply and win others to your cause. Everyone who can here. I want to see another baby for every person who can in this hall next year when I come at this time. Please comment on the effects that the efforts at boycott, divestment and sanctions are having on the Israeli economy and on the public opinion worldwide. Apartheid South Africa was destroyed between the hammer of the resistance of the African National Congress and the anvil of a worldwide campaign to boycott, divest and sanction South Africa. This is a critical weapon in our armory. But we have to be targeted and organized. I don't know about you, I get texts every other week telling me that this coffee shop or that coffee shop is giving the profits from next Saturday to Israel. It's not true. People spread these things in order to discredit the boycott movement. The vast majority of capitalist businesses don't give their Saturday profits to anybody except themselves. We have to target a few of the worst of the offenders and get everyone in the world boycotting those businesses and those products. We have, where we're strong, in universities and in city halls to make sure that none of the public's money, none of the university's money is being invested in apartheid. And while I'm on the subject of apartheid, let me make these points. I was one of the very few people on the left who was able to travel widely in apartheid South Africa. I was an agent of the African National Congress working undercover against apartheid. And every safe house in which I slept, every car in which I traveled, every dinner I ate was provided by Jewish members of the African National Congress. Every single one. The Jews in South Africa stood with the blacks against apartheid. We're asking the Jews in America to stand against apartheid in Israel, just like that. Someone called Dennis Halliday, if it's the real Dennis Halliday, my dear friend of the United Nations. Dennis, one of the heroes of the great struggle against sanctions in Iraq. Let me tell you about Dennis Halliday. He was an assistant general secretary of the United Nations on a fabulous salary with a fabulous job. He was sent to Iraq and he resigned his position because he would not be a party to the mass murder of Iraqi children in the name of sanctions, in the name of the United Nations. Please, Dennis, please rise. Dennis Halliday, ladies and gentlemen. Dennis Halliday. Dennis, I hope you come with me on this convoy. Sorry to put you on the spot. I don't know what you're doing nowadays. Dennis asks, given the genocide of Israel and Gaza and the West Bank, do you believe violence would be justified? Well, Dennis is a pacifist and a Quaker. I'm a boxer. If somebody punches me in the face, I punch them back. I'm sorry. But the violence of the victim can never be equated with the violence of the aggressor. The violence of the people resisting violence can never be the same as the violence of the criminal. The reality is this: 100 Palestinians were killed in Gaza in 22 days for every single Israeli who was killed. Thousands of Palestinians have been killed over the last 7 years for the few hundred Israelis who died. Our rabbis here know about an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, but 100 eyes and 100 teeth for every eye and every tooth is unequal violence by any standards. But with Dennis, I'm one in this. Not only do I want a holy land of Palestine where every religion can pray and practice their religion and live without fear of the other, I believe that it's possible. Dennis and I are from Irish extraction, he more than me. If somebody had told you that 400 years of war between Britain and Ireland, occupation and repression, could be ended by negotiation, by everyone seeing that things had changed, and that the day would come when the Irish Republican Army would be sitting in a cabinet with the representatives of unionism and British rule, nobody would have believed it. But that's exactly what we have now. The IRA and their enemies have decided to share the land and decided to stop killing each other. And if it can happen in Ireland, it can happen in Palestine as well. The last question is what we used to call, people my age used to call the $64,000 question, when $64,000 was a lot of money. When will Palestine be free? When I was a young man, when I first entered this great cause, I believed that I would one day walk in free Palestine. Now I'm not so sure. But mashallah, I have a 2-year-old son, Zainuddin George Galloway, and I'm sure that he will walk in free Palestine. I'm sure that, as Mr. Churchill would say, this is not the beginning of the end. This is merely the end of the beginning. I'll be back here next month, God willing. I hope to meet many of you again, and I'll see you in Gaza on the 4th of July. Thank you very much.
I have absolutely no words to follow that. I'm going to ask that everybody do 2 things. Number 1, stay away from the stage just for a few more minutes.